What is up, everyone? It is Quinn here, back with another video, and today I'm going to be talking about some second-year wide receivers, and then more specifically whether or not I'd be buying or selling them at their current ADP. I did a very similar video with the second-year running backs a couple days ago, so if you haven't seen that, go check it out after this one. And then I also just want to hear your guys' thoughts down below in the comment section, so if you agree, disagree on some of these guys, let me know why, and I will make sure to get back to you. But let's not waste any more time. Let's just get into the first second-year wide receiver I'm going to be talking about, and that is going to be Garrett Wilson. Right now, he's going off the board as the wide receiver 9 and an early second-round pick. Now, I'm going to be selling Garrett Wilson at this price, but I'm not going to be selling him as the wide receiver 9. I'm going to be selling him as an early second-round pick. I think wide receiver 9 is fair. I believe I have him as the wide receiver 10, but, kind of nitpicking at this point. For me, I just can't get there as an early second round value. And now it's not Wilson's fault that he's getting pushed ahead of a lot of these running backs that I like on Underdog. I think Garrett Wilson's going to have a really strong season. I think he's going to take a big year 2 jump. You also have Aaron Rodgers coming into that offense, which I think definitely gives Garrett Wilson a much higher ceiling. And I think he has the potential to put up mid-tier wide receiver 1 production. I just can't get to the point where I'm taking him over guys like Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, even that next tier of running backs on Underdog, like the Breece Halls, the Derrick Henrys, the Josh Jacobs. I still think I'd be leaning with those guys over Garrett Wilson. Let me know if I'm crazy on that. Maybe Underdog is kind of just pushing these wide receivers up, but I would still prefer that next tier of running backs over Garrett Wilson, even though I am fine with him here as the wide receiver 9. Now, the next wide receiver is going to be Chris Olave, and he's going a little bit after Garrett Wilson. Wide receiver 12, a late second-round pick. And this is pretty much going to be the same deal as Garrett Wilson here. It's a sell for me. I like the wide receiver 12 price tag. That's where I have him. I just can't be taking him ahead of guys like Tony Pollard, Derrick Henry, Breece Hall, Josh Jacobs, even a guy like Ramondre Stevenson. I'd have all those guys going ahead of Chris Olave. Looking at Chris Olave's rookie season, production-wise, fantasy-wise, he was the most impressive rookie wide receiver. And then just like Garrett Wilson, he is also getting a quarterback upgrade with Derek Carr coming in. I feel like Garrett Wilson's getting a lot of the hype in terms of the QB upgrade. But I mean, Derek Carr over the Andy Dalton, Jameson Winston combo, that is also a significant upgrade here for Chris Olave. So I do like Olave heading into this season. I would just prefer him as a third-round pick instead of a late second-round option. Now, the next wide receiver is going to be Christian Watson. He's going off the board as the wide receiver 19, a mid-4th-round pick. Now, I'd kind of say this value is all right, but I would honestly slightly be leaning towards sell. But I think in general, this kind of area of the draft, the 4th round, just gets really messy at the wide receiver position. These are some of the other options going in the 4th round. Mike Williams, DeAndre Hopkins, DJ Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Keenan Allen, and Drake London. Now, I would say sell because I probably would be taking most of those guys I mentioned over Christian Watson, and most of those guys are also going after him on Underdog. But I still do see the upside here for Christian Watson. As a rookie, he really flashed in the back half of the season. He started it off with that 4 for 107, 3-touchdown game, just totally kind of broke out. And then he was pretty reliant on those big plays and getting into the end zone throughout the rest of the season. But I kind of feel like that's just going to be what he is as a player. He's a freak athlete. We know he's going to have those big plays. He will be a touchdown threat. He's a guy who can break one really at any point in the game. I just think the big question is, can he command a higher target share? Because we saw last year, the most targets he commanded in a game was 8, which is just not great. That's not ideal. Obviously, if you're breaking a 50-yard reception every game, you can kind of put up with it. But to put that into perspective, there were 21 wide receivers who averaged 8 or more targets per game last year. So he hit 8 at his peak, and we had almost, 24 wide receiver 2s for fantasy who were averaging that number. That was his peak. The Packers also added more target competition in the draft with guys like Jaden Reed, Musgrave, and Kraft. So I feel like Watson is a guy who has a pretty wide range of outcomes here. If he just completely burst onto the scene in his second year and was a top 12 fantasy wide receiver, I really wouldn't be that shocked. I feel like he has that kind of upside. But if he kind of faded, maybe he doesn't get a crazy number of touchdowns and is just kind of a guy in this offense, like a back-end wide receiver 3, I feel like I also wouldn't be shocked. So, I would say he's a slight sell, but I don't hate the pick if you're really a believer in him, believer in, probably Love here as the quarterback position. And if you like the upside, like I'm not really going to hate it because I do think these wide receiver 2s, some of them may be safer, some of them may have that upside. So if you like the upside play, not going to push back super hard. Now, the next wide receiver is going to be Drake London. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 25 at the round 4-5 turn. And I talked about Drake London in my Do Not Draft video, so you can probably guess I'm going to be selling him here. This is just a spot where I love the player, hate the situation, broke it down super in depth in that Do Not Draft video, but the Falcons are lined up once again to lead the league in rush attempts. Drake London as a rookie had the 5th highest target share in the NFL at 29.4%, the 2nd highest target rate at 32.4%. So he did what he could do, right? He commanded targets at a very high level. The problem is if there just aren't a ton of targets to go around, it's tough to be putting up solid fantasy production. Even with those, that target share, that target rate, he was the wide receiver 47 in points per game. So could he hit this wide receiver 25 mark? Yeah, he probably could, but I feel like it would be him just wildly overachieving on this offense. And I just don't really see the situation where he's taking that leap to be a mid to high-end wide receiver 2 unless the Falcons just kind of totally change their identity, which I don't see happening, especially after they went out and drafted Bijan Robinson. So I hate it. Like I said in the Do Not Draft video, I love Drake London as the player. I just hate the situation here with the Falcons. Now, the next wide receiver is going to be George Pickens, going off the board as the wide receiver 36 at the 6-7 turn. I feel like in the running back video, I had a decent number of buys, or at least kind of neutral spots. I feel like I'm selling a lot of these wide receivers, and Pickens is going to be another sell here. I think he had a pretty solid overall rookie season, but I feel like a lot of flashy plays have kind of pushed up his price just a little too high for me. We know he's going to be a strong down-the-field weapon. He had the 3rd highest ADOT in the NFL, was 7th in deep targets, 14th in yards per target, 12th in yards per reception. So he was pretty efficient, 13th in contested catch rate. We've all seen the viral, down-the-field plays he made last year. The problem for me is that he just didn't really command enough targets anywhere else. We saw him down the field. 5 targets per game overall and a 15.6% target share isn't super encouraging, heading into year 2. And honestly, this is just a spot where we have 2 wide receivers on this same team, and I just think people are favoring the wrong guy. Deontay Johnson is currently going after George Pickens, which is pretty crazy to me. I understand Deontay had a terrible fantasy season last year, but it's because the dude scored 0 touchdowns. It would be almost impossible for him to repeat that here in 2023. We saw Deontay average 8.6 targets per game last year, a 27% target share. That's the guy I want from this offense. We've seen 3 straight seasons of Deontay just being a target funnel, so he's the guy I want to be going after here in this range, or maybe even a little after George Pickens. Kind of turned into a Deontay Johnson spiel there, but I am in on Deontay once again this season. Now, the next wide receiver is going to be Treylon Burks. He's going off the board as the wide receiver 37 in round 7, and this is going to be a buy for me. I talked about Treylon Burks in my must-draft wide receiver video. As a rookie, we saw Treylon Burks show some really solid flashes of being a very solid wide receiver in his rookie season, and that was with him being held back, with turf toe and a concussion. It just seemed like he was never really able to build on that season. But heading into year 2, he's slotted to be the clear-cut wide receiver 1 on this Titans offense. I understand the Titans passing attack probably isn't going to be great. The offense as a whole is probably going to be rough, but I still think Treylon Burks is talented enough to command a really solid number of targets in this offense. I'm expecting a year 2 breakout, and similar to the guy I'm going to talk about next, I feel like some of these wide receivers just get hit with some tough situations, right? Like a guy like George Pickens, who was able to put together some decent counting numbers. He didn't really get hit with these injuries that limited his production. Treylon Burks, he was starting to build, getting solid opportunities before the turf toe. Then after the turf toe, he was starting to build. Then he gets pretty much knocked unconscious during a game and was just never really able to kind of put, performance after performance together. I think he'll be able to do that here in year 2. The next guy is going to be Jahan Dotson, and I'm really coming around here on Jahan Dotson. He's going off the board as the wide receiver 41, a 7-8 turn guy, and this is going to be a strong buy for me. like I kind of, compared him to Treylon Burks, Dotson showed some really nice flashes, but he really wasn't able to fully put together like a season-long profile. He had a hamstring injury early on in the season. Dotson actually came out of the gates kind of hot, scored 13 plus PPR points in 3 of his first 4 games, but it just wasn't sustainable production. He had 4 touchdowns in those 4 games, and he actually didn't go over 50 receiving yards like one time. So not saying it was like fake production, but like scoring 4 touchdowns in 4 games is not as important as like getting a ton of volume in the long run, at least, when we're evaluating him as a player. So he ends up suffering a hamstring injury in week 4, is out all the way until week 10. Then he plays week 10, week 11, and week 12, and he pretty much did nothing, but it's not like he stepped back into the same role he had early on in the season. He saw his snaps and routes cut from what he had early on. Then he got above an 80% route participation for the last 5 games, averaged 14.7 PPR points per game over that 5-game stretch, and then went for over 50 yards or 50 plus yards in 4 of those 5 games. So I think he was really starting to kind of showcase his talent later on in the season. I think he's lined up to be very productive here in 2023. I just think the issue here for Dotson is that I do think his ceiling is kind of capped, but I mean, like, what ceiling do we have of some of these other guys going at like wide receiver 41, right? Like, it's not like we've got a ton of wide receiver ones here, but just looking at his ceiling, this offense is probably going to be bottom half, in the NFL in terms of points, passing, all of that. And then also with Terry McLaurin ahead of him, it's just tough to see him outproducing Terry with how great we know, Terry McLaurin is as a player. I still think he's a really solid value here at wide receiver 1. I could see him giving you maybe like fringe wide receiver 2 production. If he's like a high-end wide receiver 3, I think that's obviously a win here at wide receiver 41. Just a young, talented player I'd be willing to bet on here later on in drafts. And then the final second-year wide receiver I'm going to be talking about here is Jameson Williams. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 48 in the 9th round. And for me, this is going to be another buy. Obviously, J-Mo has not had a great start to his NFL career, missed the majority of 2022 working back from his ACL tear. We kind of expected that. Played in the last 6 games, caught 1 pass in those 6 games on 9 targets, so he pretty much did nothing. That was a touchdown reception, but I mean, the stats are just non-existent from Jameson Williams. But I feel like everyone kind of heading into the season knew that he was not going to be a year 1 producer. Coming off the ACL, he wasn't going to be balling out. That wasn't like a true representation of him as a player, running a few routes a game. That's not who Jameson Williams is. At this point, I feel like we still have pretty much no idea who J-Mo is going to be as a player at the NFL level. But now he gets hit with that betting suspension, which is tough. I believe that's the first 6 games of the season. So now we're going to have to kind of wait and see again, what he is going to be. I just think looking at this price tag, wide receiver 48, he's going as like a late wide receiver 4, early wide receiver 5. Like if we're getting a first-round rookie pick who's getting, a suspension for part of the year, I just think this is a fine area to go out and get him. There are guys like Elijah Moore and maybe even a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster who are going right after him that maybe I'd prefer. But after that, like the wide receiver position just really falls off. So if you're throwing a dart here on J-Mo, I think it's fine, right? Like I'd rather be taking J-Mo than some wide receiver who might give you back-end wide receiver 3 production for a few weeks of the season. Like, just take the swing on the high upside guy, and then if it doesn't work out, he gets back, doesn't do anything, you cut him, you pick up a handcuff, you move on. You know what I mean? So that is going to wrap it up for my second-year wide receivers here. Let me know what you guys think. Seemed to be some more sells than the running back video, but we did get some solid values later on, at least in my opinion. So thank you all for stopping by. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in the next one.